Today, we uncover the shocking truth about UK food safety during a heatwave. And honestly, once you hear what we found, you might think twice before you go for that chicken dinner or grab that meal deal on your lunch break. Because this summer, while most of us have just been trying to stay cool, something much darker has been happening behind the scenes. To animals who had no control over the temperature they were kept in lorries stuck in motorway traffic, in warehouses built decades ago that no one ever bothered to adapt for this kind of heat, and on floors and roads right across Britain, thousands of animals have reportedly lost their lives simply because the system that's supposed to look after them and that we all depend on to feed this country was never properly built to the standards for UK heatwaves. We're talking about farms and transport networks built only for the same mild weather, having to carry livestock and food through temperatures pushing past 40 degrees again and again. And it seems like nowhere near enough has been done about it, if anything at all. And when that system breaks, it doesn't just break quietly somewhere out of sight, it breaks on the shop floor, in aisles you walk down every week, and to the fridges right at home. This year alone, major supermarkets have had to switch off entire chilled sections, wrap them in plastic, and throw away food because their own equipment couldn't handle the heat to keep the food looking fresh enough to pass on to the customers. Executives from some of Britain's biggest food retailers have openly admitted, in public, on the record, that their stores struggled. Some have even confirmed they're now spending hundreds of millions of pounds trying to fix a problem they should have seen coming years ago. So today, we're not just giving you a list of foods to be careful with this summer, although we will do that. We're going to show you exactly where, in the journey from farm to fork, this is all quietly going wrong, long before that food ever reaches your basket. We've gone through the research, the official data, and the most recent reporting we could find, and we've identified 21 everyday foods where you genuinely need to pay closer attention right now, ranked from the ones you'll recognize instantly to the ones that might surprise you. And before we get into any of that, I need to ask you something. And I mean this properly. If you think British shoppers deserve to know when the system meant to protect them is falling short, then smash that hype button right now. I don't say that lightly. Every single time that button gets pressed, it tells the algorithm that this conversation matters, that ordinary people actually care about where their food comes from and how it's been treated on the way to their plate. This channel only exists because people like you are willing to stand up and say, we're not just going to accept whatever we're told, we want transparency, we want accountability, and we want the companies making enormous profits from feeding this country to actually invest properly in doing it safely. That hype button is a small thing to click, but it adds up to something much bigger, a genuine, growing voice of British consumers who refuse to be taken for granted. So please, hype this video, and while you're at it, drop a comment down below, because I want to know what you think about all this, whether any of this has happened to you, whether you've noticed empty fridges in your local shop this summer, or whether you've had a moment where you looked at your dinner and wondered how it actually got to you. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, because we're going to keep doing videos exactly like this one, pulling back the curtain on the food industry so you don't have to. Right, let's get into it. Number 21. Chicken. We're starting here because chicken has genuinely become the poster child for everything going wrong with Britain's food system in the heat. During last year's hottest stretches, nearly 6,600 animals, the vast majority of them chickens, reportedly lost their lives in transit on their way to slaughter, more than double the number from the previous year. On some of the worst single days, close to 2,000 birds died in one go, with body temperatures recorded as high as 46 degrees. Chickens can't sweat like we can. All they can do is pant, and when the ambient temperature climbs into the 40s, that simply isn't enough. Government documents going back 2 decades have acknowledged that catching, loading, and transporting chickens creates a particular risk during hot weather, yet here we are, still watching the same thing play out summer after summer. And it isn't just about welfare, although that alone should be enough to give you pause. Scientists have found that heat stress in these birds can actually damage the lining of their gut, letting bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter leak into places they shouldn't be. Campylobacter is already the single biggest cause of food poisoning in this country, and cases hit a decade high recently, rising over 17% in a single year, with adults in their 50s 60s and 70s making up nearly half of all reported cases. This past summer, forecasters warned of another chicken shortage as temperatures were expected to climb past 40 degrees again, with one senior food and climate analyst warning that Britain's food system, including the animals within it, is increasingly buckling under repeated extreme heat. If the industry itself is warning about shortages because the supply chain can't cope, that tells you everything about how fragile this really is before the chicken even reaches your trolley. It's also worth remembering this isn't the first time Britain's chicken supply has completely fallen over. Now stack heat stress, mass mortality in transit, and a cold chain that's already decades old on top of a supply network that's clearly shown it can collapse from far smaller problems, and you start to understand why farmers and analysts alike keep describing this as a system running on borrowed time. One farmer and food campaigner put it simply, saying the current heat across the UK is another reminder that farmers are on the front line and that prolonged high temperatures place huge stress on livestock while piling even more pressure onto an industry that's already stretched thin. When the people actually working the land are the ones raising the alarm, it's probably worth listening. Number 20. Sausage rolls, pork pies and buffet meats. These are proper British staples, the sort of thing you'd find at a village fete, a church hall do, all piled up on a table at a family barbecue. The trouble is, these products are dense, moist, and often sit out on serving tables for hours in the sun without anyone really thinking about it. But before they even reach that buffet table, they've already been sitting on delivery pallets, in stock rooms, and on shop floor displays that, as we now know, aren't always managing to stay cold enough during a heat wave. These are ready-to-eat products, meaning there's no final cooking step to fall back on if something's gone wrong earlier in the chain. If the chilled cabinet they were sitting in couldn't maintain a safe temperature, that risk has already been baked in long before anyone's cut into a sausage roll at a garden party. Number 19. Potato salad, egg mayonnaise and pasta salad. Every barbecue in this country has one of these bowls sitting on the table, and most of us assume they're safe simply because they came from the supermarket that morning. The truth is, these are moist, high-protein dishes that rely entirely on being kept properly chilled right up until the moment you buy them. When a cabinet's air curtain collapses in extreme heat, and we now have plenty of evidence that this is happening across major chains this year, these are exactly the kind of dishes that sit at the front of the shelf, absorbing the warmest air first. It's not the mayonnaise itself that's usually the problem, since commercial mayonnaise is actually quite acidic. It's everything else mixed in with it that needs the cold chain to have held up properly. Number 18. Prawns, prawn cocktail, and other shellfish platters. This is one of the great British retro classics, and it remains hugely popular, especially for anyone who grew up with it as the default starter at a family celebration. The issue here is that these products usually have no cooking step left before you eat them. Whatever happened during their journey, from the water they were harvested in, through processing, and all the way to the chilled shelf, goes straight onto your plate. This year, official monitoring picked up contamination in shellfish beds right here on the UK coast, and imported shellfish have also turned up in food safety alerts. With a chicken leg, at least there's an opportunity to cook out any problems. With a prawn cocktail, there isn't, which makes the handling before it reaches you the only thing standing between a nice starter and a nasty surprise. Number 17. Cooked rice, especially from takeaways and curry houses. This one catches people out more than almost anything else on this list, because the danger isn't really about whether the rice looks or smells off. Rice can carry a bacterium that survives normal cooking, and if that rice is left to cool slowly at room temperature, the numbers can build up to a point where reheating it won't save you, because the toxin it produces can survive even that. The Food Standards Agency's own head of food hygiene has said as much, warning that if rice is cooled slowly or kept out too long, whatever grows inside it can produce toxins that simply aren't destroyed by putting it back in the microwave. Now here's where it gets particularly relevant for takeaways and curry houses. When you order in, you have absolutely no idea how many times that rice has been cooked, cooled and reheated before it even reaches your door. Some establishments batch cook rice in advance and reheat portions throughout a busy evening service, which means by the time it lands on your plate, it may already have been through more than one heating cycle. And if you've got leftovers from that same takeaway sitting in your fridge overnight, you're stacking risk on top of risk because you're now the second or even third round of cooling and reheating that rice has been through. In a British summer, in a kitchen that's likely a good few degrees warmer than usual. There's a reason this particular risk barely gets talked about compared to something like undercooked chicken. Bacillus cereus, the bug behind this, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make rice smell off, go slimy, or change color, which means the usual tricks people rely on, a sniff test or a quick look, tell you absolutely nothing here. The only thing that actually matters is time and temperature, specifically how quickly that rice went from the pan into the fridge and how many times it's been through a heating and cooling cycle since. Official guidance is that rice should ideally be cooled within about an hour and eaten within a day, which is actually stricter than the advice given for most other leftovers. And that's for rice you've cooked yourself, where you at least know the full history of it. With a takeaway, you're placing complete trust in a kitchen you've never seen, hoping that whoever's behind that counter tonight is following exactly that same standard on a busy Friday evening in a kitchen that's likely running hotter than usual because of the weather outside. Number 16. Pre-packed sandwiches, the classic meal deal. Millions of us grab one of these every single day without a second thought, and for most of the year that's perfectly reasonable. But these sandwiches live in exactly the kind of open-fronted chiller cabinets that we've seen struggling across the country this summer. They're moist, ready to eat, and often combine several different risky ingredients: sliced meat, soft cheese, mayonnaise, salad, all in one product. If that cabinet's been running warm because the shop's cooling system is under strain, that sandwich has been sitting closer to room temperature than anyone realizes. And there's no way to tell just by looking at the packet. Number 15. Mince, burgers and sausages. This is the heart of every British barbecue, and it's also where one of the most persistent myths in food safety causes real problems. A burger can look completely charred on the outside and still be raw in the middle, and that outside color tells you absolutely nothing about what's happening at the core. Official guidance is clear that these products need to reach a proper core temperature all the way through, because mincing spreads any surface bacteria from the original cut of meat right through the whole product. Rather than leaving it safely on the outside where cooking can deal with it easily, on a barbecue, especially a cheap disposable one that loses heat fast, it's incredibly easy to end up with something that looks perfectly done and isn't. Number 14. Cream cakes and trifle. There is something wonderfully British about a supermarket trifle appearing at a summer gathering, but these desserts are exactly the sort of product that suffers when a bakery counter or dessert chiller can't hold its temperature. They're soft, high in moisture, and meant to be eaten cold and unheated, which means there's no final safety step to rely on. A trifle that's spent time warming up in the car, then on the kitchen counter, then back in the fridge, has effectively had several separate windows of risk stacked on top of each other, and that's before you even consider whether the chiller it came from was working properly in the first place. Number 13. Ice cream. Everyone assumes ice cream is one of the safer choices in hot weather, but the real risk here comes from repeated melting and refreezing, along with poor hygiene around soft serve machines. When a supermarket freezer fails, and we've seen plenty of reports of exactly that happening this year, staff often have to move stock sometimes multiple times before deciding whether it's still safe to sell. Refreezing something that's partially melted doesn't undo whatever happened while it was warm, it just makes it solid again. Number 12. Deli meats and the cooked meats counter. Ham, chicken, corned beef, tongue, all the classics from a proper deli counter. These meats are ready to eat, handled repeatedly by staff and sliced fresh, and they're specifically flanked by health authorities as a higher risk category for a nasty bug called listeria. Officials have been explicit that people over 65 face a greater risk from these products, which lines up almost exactly with who's watching this video right now. And the risk here isn't really about anything you do at home, it's about how long that meat sat in a counter that might have been running warmer than it should have been long before you ever pointed at it and asked for 4 slices. Listeria doesn't cause anywhere near as many cases as something like Campylobacter, but it's treated as one of the most serious risks in British food safety for a simple reason. Of the people who go on to develop a serious infection from it, roughly 1 in 5 don't survive. That's an extraordinarily high proportion for a foodborne illness, and it's exactly why health authorities keep circling back to the same handful of products, deli meats among them, every single time they issue fresh guidance. It's also why watching a counter that's been left running warm during a heatwave isn't some minor technicality. For most healthy adults, a bit of bad luck with deli meat might mean a rough couple of days. For an older shopper or anyone with an underlying health condition, that same bit of bad luck carries a completely different level of risk. And number 11. Soft cheeses. Brie, camembert and similar mold-ripened cheeses have a soft, moist interior where bacteria can multiply during storage. And health authorities have issued genuine product recalls this year over exactly this issue, with some batches found to be carrying dangerously high levels of contamination. This isn't some rare theoretical risk, it's happened recently, with real products pulled from real shelves. Number 10. Smoked salmon and other smoked fish. This is a lovely addition to a summer brunch, but cold smoked fish is never actually cooked through during production, meaning any contamination present simply isn't dealt with before it reaches the shop. Health authorities have specifically and repeatedly warned older adults to be aware of the risk here, on top of the usual warnings for pregnant women. Recent incidents have involved smoked salmon imported from Europe, showing that this risk sits right at the point of import and processing long before it ever reaches a British breakfast table. Number 9. Bagged salad. We all buy it. We all assume a quick rinse under the tap sorts out any problem, but studies have shown that washing bagged leaves at home does very little to reduce bacterial levels once they're already there. Last year saw a genuine wave of recalls linked to ready-to-eat salads and sandwiches from major producers, with health alerts issued over both nasty bacteria and food safety breaches. The packaging itself often tells you to eat it within 24 hours of opening, which is a quiet admission from the industry that these products are only ever a day or two away from becoming a real problem. Number 8. Fresh cream and dairy generally. Milk, fresh cream, and yogurt all rely completely on an unbroken cold chain, and they're exactly the products that supermarkets have reported running short of this year, precisely because their chillers couldn't keep up. When a fridge section gets switched off entirely, which has happened at branches of several major chains this summer, dairy is one of the first categories to be pulled from sale because it spoils fast once it warms up even slightly. Number 7. Pre-cut melon and fruit pots. Most of us assume fruit is automatically the safe, healthy choice in hot weather, but once that protective skin has been cut away, the moist flesh underneath becomes vulnerable in exactly the same way any other ready-to-eat product would. Whole melon is genuinely low risk. Melon that's already been sliced, packaged, and left sitting in a chiller is an entirely different product from a safety point of view. Number 6. Bean sprouts. These grow in warm, humid conditions during production, which happens to be exactly the environment that certain bacteria love, and they're regularly involved in salmonella-related recalls, including some linked directly to sprouted seeds sold across multiple European countries and the UK this year. They're often eaten raw or barely cooked in a quick stir-fry, which removes the one step that would otherwise deal with the problem. Number 5. Unpasteurized and fresh-pressed juices. These have become popular as a healthier alternative to the mass-produced stuff, but skipping pasteurization means skipping the one process specifically designed to deal with naturally occurring bacteria. In warm weather, any juice that hasn't gone through that heat treatment carries a genuinely higher risk than the bottles you'd find on a standard supermarket shelf. Number 4. Takeaway delivery, whether that's a curry house, a fried chicken shop, or anything ordered through an app. We've already talked about rice, but the wider point here applies to almost anything you order in during hot weather. You have no visibility at all into how long that food sat waiting in a hot kitchen before your rider even picked it up, how it was kept warm, or how many times it might have been reheated during a busy service. Add in a rider on a bike or moped in direct summer sun with a delivery bag that offers only basic insulation, and you've got several extra hours of uncertainty stacked on top of whatever happened in the kitchen itself. Number 3. Home grocery delivery orders. More of us than ever are getting our shopping delivered rather than picking it up ourselves, but a single delivery van might be carrying chilled and frozen groceries for 10 or 15 different households on one route. Every single stop means the doors open, warm air rushes in, and the van itself often sits parked in direct sunlight, while the order in front of yours gets delivered. By the time a van reaches its last stop of the afternoon, the food inside has been through a very different journey than the first delivery of the day, even though it left the depot at exactly the same temperature. And it's not just the vans themselves either. The same aging infrastructure we've talked about throughout this whole video sits right behind that delivery slot you booked. Since those vans are loaded from the exact same warehouses and shop floor stockrooms that have been struggling to stay cold enough all summer, if the depot supplying your order has already had its own cooling problems that week, your shopping was never starting from a fully safe baseline in the first place, regardless of how careful the driver is once it's loaded onto the van. Number 2. Frozen food generally. It sounds like the safest category of all, but frozen food across the country came under genuine strain this year, with industry figures openly discussing whether the standard -18 degrees setting even needs to change as our summers get consistently hotter. When freezers fail, and several major retailers have confirmed exactly that happening this year, stock has to be assessed, moved, and in some cases thrown away, which tells you the entire frozen category is running much closer to the edge than most shoppers would ever assume. Here's something that might genuinely surprise you. The reason freezers across this country are set to -18 degrees has nothing to do with any modern food safety calculation at all. It goes back to the man credited with inventing the modern freezer back in the 1920s, who simply worked things out using 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which happens to convert to almost exactly -18 Celsius. Nearly a century later, that's still the industry standard. Number 1. Any product taken from a chiller or freezer that's already in the middle of a breakdown. This is really the one that ties everything else on this list together. This year alone, shoppers at branches of some of Britain's biggest supermarket chains have arrived to find entire chilled aisles switched off, taped up, or sitting completely empty, with staff clearing stock because the cooling system simply couldn't keep up with the heat outside. Senior figures at these companies have admitted, on the record, that their stores struggled, and that a huge amount of the equipment involved is decades old, built for a climate this country simply doesn't have anymore. One industry leader put it plainly, saying these systems were built to expel hot air into a mild environment, and that trying to do that in extreme heat makes the whole thing far less effective. When a chiller fails, someone somewhere has to make a judgment call about what gets pulled and what gets left on the shelf, and that decision is happening far more often and under far more pressure than most of us would ever want to believe. To put the scale of this properly into perspective, industry figures have pointed out that around 460 major cold storage sites keep this country's food moving, and more than half of them are over 20 years old. Without the modern refrigeration plants or properly insulated walls and roofs that newer sites would have, that means the problem isn't really about one supermarket having a bad week. It's about an entire hidden network of warehouses, lorries, and shop floor units that was built for a version of Britain that simply doesn't exist anymore. Every single item on this list, from the chicken at number 21 right down to whatever's sitting in your freezer tonight, passes through some part of that same aging network at some point on its journey to you. When that network is fine, you never think about it for a second. It's only when it starts to buckle, aisle by aisle, store by store, that you realize just how much of your family's food safety has been quietly resting on infrastructure nobody's properly invested in for decades. So that's the full list. 21 everyday foods where the real risk very often starts long before that product ever reaches your home, sitting instead in a lorry stuck in traffic, a warehouse built decades ago, or a shop floor cabinet fighting a losing battle against a British summer that keeps getting hotter. If any of this made you stop and think even for a second, then please hit that hype button before you go anywhere else. It genuinely helps push this conversation further, and it tells the people running this industry that ordinary shoppers are paying attention and expect better. Drop a comment and let me know what you think, or whether you've noticed any of this happening at your own local shop this summer, because I read every single one, and it shapes exactly what we cover next. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because there's plenty more of this coming. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and protect your plate.